Welcome to episode 4 of Love Ultras. I'm John Kynaston. For this episode I wanted to do something about a question which is asked quite a few times by my non-running friends and family, and that is, what do you think about when you're running? I think the thing which most people find quite difficult is the thought that we run for 10 hours, 20 hours. Last year I ran the Hogmoors 160 and it took me almost 50 hours, just a few minutes under. And that's a long time to be running and moving and walking in a race. And so it's a legitimate question, and it's one which I think I'd like to answer. So what do I think about when I'm running ultras? And to answer it, I wanted to use as an illustration James Cracknell and Ben Fogle. These guys have done quite a few adventures together, and the first one they did was a rowing race across the Atlantic from Europe to America, and they wrote a book called The Crossing, and it was a great read. I really recommend it. But basically Ben Fogle and James Cracknell are very different in their approach and the way they go about the challenge. They didn't really know each other that well. I can't quite remember which way round it was. I think Ben Fogle wanted to do it and he needed a partner, and he thought James Cracknell would be a good idea because he was an Olympic rower. But I say their characters are very different. Ben Fogle was very much about the adventure, didn't really care too much about the time and where they finished. He just wanted to sort of challenge himself. He became famous really through a program called The Castaway, where he was cast away for a year, I think in a Scottish island. And he sort of coped with living on his own or with a group, and that's where he made his name. James Cracknell is a double Olympic champion in rowing, and very driven guy, very competitive, and you could tell straight away that there was going to be fireworks between them. But as the crossing went on, it was obvious that these differences came out, and the book is written from both their perspective. So sometimes it's James writing, sometimes it's Ben writing, and they were pretty honest about their thoughts and how it went and some of the things that they struggled with each other. But there was one bit which, when I read it, I thought, yeah, that's a good illustration about my own thinking and my own answering this question of what I think about when I'm doing an ultra. So I just want to read just a couple of paragraphs from the book of The Crossing. And this is Ben Fogle was writing, and he was talking about James Cracknell, and he said he, as in James, was desperate to see his family and friends, but unlike me, it had never been the thing that kept him going in those dark sessions. As I stared, frightened at his increasingly rapid decline, I recollected a conversation we'd had a few weeks previously. Unusually for James, he had inquired about what went on in my head. "What do you think about when you're mid-session?" he had inquired. "Oh, you know, Marina, Marina, our weekends together, trips to the seaside, walking the dogs. I tend to relive memorable moments, my trips to the Amazon, travels in South America, and I plan future adventures. I get myself as far away from here as possible. I've always been able to travel huge distances in my mind. I'm a born daydreamer, and that imaginative capacity is definitely something that got me through tough times in the past, particularly on Castaway. But these dreams weren't solely distractions. Plans for new adventures were what spurred me on to Antigua. My life to come with Marina was one shimmering vision. I pulled my oars for every time I took my seat." "Why, what do you think about? What drives you through the toughest hours?" I asked. "Our speed. How better to take advantage of the winds, whether or not we're following the right course. How to improve our chances of winning, basically." That pretty much said it all. And I thought that was really interesting because the way they did their rowing, particularly through the night, they would take 2 hours on, 2 hours off. So it was a tiny boat, but Ben would row for 2 hours while James tried to get some sleep, and then they would swap over. And when they talked about that question of what you think about during those lonely times, when you're on your own, it's dark, and you're having to row and keep the boat going. And Ben Fogle's idea was to get as far away from that as he could. He didn't think about the rowing, he just tried to get into an automatic state and just keep himself going as best he could. And whereas James Cracknell spent the whole time thinking about the boat, thinking about how to get it going faster, working out whether they were going in the right direction, making the most of the opportunity that he had to keep it moving, because he wanted to win and to do the best he could. So relating that to my running, and particularly running long distances for a lot of time, I asked myself, am I more like Ben Fogle or am I more like James Cracknell? And quite a few times that I've run with friends, I've asked them that question, and I've related that story and said about the way that they approach the rowing. And I think for me, I would say that I'm a mixture of both. I think in a training run, and when I'm on my own and I'm doing a 5, 6, 7 hour run, I'm a lot more like Ben Fogle. I love to daydream a bit. I like to think about things that I've done. I like to think about things that are going on. I suppose I do a fair bit of visualization. If I'm doing the West Highland Way race, for example, then I would spend time thinking about that and thinking about where I'd like to be at different points, maybe thinking about some of my friends and whether I'll be ahead of them or not, or how far ahead they'll be of me. And I like to visualize a fair bit. But in a training run, I'm more like Ben Fogle, and definitely like to get away from the run in some ways in my mind. I like to think about other things and use that time. But in a race, I think I'm a lot more like James Cracknell. And it's amazing how even in a 20, 30, 40, 50 hour race, it's amazing how concentrated I can be on the race. And so let's just take an example for the West Highland Way. You know, I've done it a couple of times in 20 hours and just over. And I would say the majority of that time I was really focused. I set off from Mulgai. I like to have my little mini splits, and I'll maybe talk about that another one of these episodes. But I like to break it all down into small segments. So when I set off, I'm really just thinking about the first 2.5 miles, making sure I don't go off too quick, making sure I feel comfortable, making sure I'm not breathing too hard, if I'm using my heart rate to make sure that's in check. And I just spend the whole of the race just going from mini split to mini split, and I find that is really helpful. And as the race goes on, I'll be doing a check just to make sure everything's going okay, I'm not hurting anywhere, things are not too sore, and just try and keep myself really just focused on the race, thinking about my pace, thinking about my food, thinking about my water, thinking about what's hurting or not, and trying to distract me on that. So I would say in a race, I'm really concentrated on that. And one of the things I do find quite hard is as the race goes on, and particularly once I get past halfway and to about 3/4 of the way, it's easy to start thinking about the finish and thinking about, I wonder what time I'm going to make. And I have to fight that sometimes and just try and stay in the present, because if I start thinking too far ahead, then it either sort of overwhelms me a bit, thinking, I've still got another 15 miles to go or 20 miles to go, and I lose focus a bit. So I do try and really concentrate on what I'm doing and making sure I keep moving and I'm in control of the race. And I suppose the other thing though that I do find is when things start to get hard, I do try and take my mind out of things. So one of my key things is I do a lot of counting. So as the race goes on, I'm starting to hurt a bit and my mind's starting to say, oh, do you really want to do this, and you need to slow down and whatever else. I just try and count, and whether it's just counting to 50 and just I try and do it on my breath, or on every time my right foot goes down, I'll count a step, and I'll just try and do that for 3 or 4 lots of 50, and then say, right, I'll walk for 20 and then do another 2, 3 sets of 50. Or sometimes I might count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and just keep on going like that, and various sort of patterns that I will do in my mind, just to get my mind away from things. But generally, I would say, as I said, I'm more like Ben Fogle in a training run, and more like James Cracknell in a race. And I found that quite an interesting illustration, really, of what I think about. But I say, when I've spoken to friends and family about that, they just find it really hard to imagine that you could concentrate on running for 10 hours, for 20 hours. But I think because I think most of us break it down into smaller segments. I think if you set off from Mulgai thinking, right, I've got to run 95 miles, and you're thinking about the finish, then I think it can be a bit overwhelming. So the best way I find is to try and break it down and to just try and concentrate on what I can do. And I can run 3 miles, I can run another 2 miles, I can run 4 miles, and just do lots of smaller segments to keep it going, so that it doesn't become overwhelming and find I just can't cope with that. So I wonder what you're like. I wonder whether you're more like a Ben Fogle, who likes to completely get away from what you're doing and daydream and think about other things, or whether you're a bit more like James Cracknell, who's totally focused on his race, totally focused on making sure he's moving the best that he can and he's getting the best out of himself. So there's my thoughts on what I think about during an ultra race and training for an ultra.